The rich tradition of the sea includes the beliefs and practices of mariners who traverse the globe in pursuit of wealth and adventure, many of which have become part of everyday life. Here are some traditions of the sea which are known more, some thankfully so, some lamentably so, and some possibly still carried on. Calling the ship she. Ships, like dozens of inanimate objects, were referred to as being female for hundreds of years by seafarers and landlubbers alike. In 1941, Adolf Hitler declared that the newest German battleship, Bismarck, was to be referred to as male, since it was too strong and powerful to be called she. The ship's sailors ignored their Führer's command, at least in their letters home to loved ones. Ships bore many feminine designations, both in the description of the vessels themselves and in their behavior while underway. American Admiral of the Fleet and World War II leader Chester Nimitz once replied to a reporter's query over why ships were considered feminine by sailors by claiming that it was because it cost so much money to keep them in powder and paint. No doubt such a reply would be the end of a distinguished naval career today. Alas, the world changes. By 2003, the Chicago Manual of Style advised against referring to ships as she, preferring that a vessel be referred to as it, regardless of the characteristics it displayed to the crew aboard. Numerous other feminine references long used by sailors became equally unacceptable to those who determinately police such things. They ignore the fact that the Latin word for ship and one of the roots for the word navy is novice, a word of feminine gender. Although many sailors, past and present day, were and are determinately sexist in describing why ships are referred to as she, ships still traverse what is often called Mother Earth. Yet to refer to a vessel as she, even as will Captain James T. Kirk of Enterprise in the 23rd century, is no longer socially acceptable. Line crossing ceremony. Sailors voyage across perceived designators never seen by the landlocked, and when doing so have traditionally marked the event by celebrating the return of those who have been there before, and the initiation, through extensive humiliation, of those transgressing for the first time. At the equator, lowly pollywogs become hardened shellbacks. Equator crossing ceremonies, typically featuring King Neptune, are common in the Navy and are also sometimes carried out for passengers' entertainment on civilian ocean liners and cruise ships. When a ship travels across the Arctic Circle, its crew become polar bears and join the Order of the Blue Nose. Those who cross the international date line, besides either adding or subtracting a day of their lives, enter the domain of the Golden Dragon. Burial at sea. As far as anyone knows, the tradition of burial at sea has been in practice for as long as people have gone to sea. In earlier times, the body was sewn into a weighted shroud, usually sailcloth. The body was then set over the side, usually with an appropriate religious ceremony. Many burials at sea took place as recently as World War II, when naval forces operated at sea for weeks and months at a time. Since World War II, many service members, veterans, and family members have chosen to be buried at sea. Hammocks. Well into the 20th century, including upon many of the older ships which served during the Second World War, hammocks served as the sleeping space for sailors aboard ships. Hammocks were well suited to the purpose. When not occupied, they were unslung and stowed away, providing open space for ship's work. They were easily aired out, dried quickly after being doused with seawater, and as the ship rolled and pitched around them, they were relatively stable, though the occupants sensed the motion readily. Once a sailor became used to the necessary curvature of the spine while sleeping, and the motion the hammock induced, they were comfortable, though usually packed in tiers. In the British Navy for decades, 18 inches per man was the allotted sleeping space. Hammocks originally displaced place berths aboard ships when sailors discovered they were more comfortable for use at sea. They were developed by natives of the Caribbean, adopted by Spanish and Portuguese mariners, and eventually became one of the symbols of the sailor. Aboard ship, a man's hammock was often his only private space. His earthly possessions were tied up in it during the day, at night suspended in a bag from it as he slept within. If he was so unfortunate as to die at sea, his body was sewn within his hammock for burial beneath the waves, the final stitch often through his nose to ensure that he was truly dead. By the 1950s, hammocks were for the most part gone from ships, with sailors again sleeping in berths, in which they again endure the myriad motions of a ship underway. Keeping the ship clean. Ships, particularly warships, were for the most part kept scrupulously clean by their officers, not out of consideration for hygiene, but rather as a means of ensuring the ship, upon which all lives depended, was properly maintained. Swabbing the decks exposed to the weather, cleverly called weather decks, followed by scrubbing them with stones known as holy stones, was a several times a day occurrence as part of maintaining the ship. Sailors and swabbies have been words interchangeable for centuries as a result. Swabbing the decks caused the water to raise the grain of the wood, the rough holy stones, so called because they were roughly the size and shape of a Bible, smooth the wood and helped seal the decks, along with the tar forced between the seams. Cleaning the ship was a constant exercise. Predicting the weather. Nearly everyone has heard the saying, "Red sky at night, sailors delight." Red sky at morning, sailors take warning. The adage, which bears a certain amount of truth, is a means of predicting the weather. A morning in which the dawn breaks red is an indication of stormy weather pending, while an evening with a glorious red sunset foretells fair weather for the succeeding 24 hours. It is a simple weather forecast, which relies on the sun setting in the west, the direction from which most weather patterns travel in the northern hemisphere. It began with sailors casting anxious eyes towards a far horizon at a time when the only scientific means of predicting weather at their disposal was a barometer, itself a device understood aboard only by the captain and perhaps a few of his officers. Daily ration of alcohol. On ships of all nations of the Christian world, ships of the Muslim nations often, but not always, proscribed alcohol, sailors were daily served a ration of alcohol in the form of wine, liquor, or beer, and for ships in the commercial trade often all three. In warships, the amount of alcohol was less copious, but still a daily event. By the mid-18th century, the beverage of choice was rum, served with the juice of lemons or limes, at least on ships of English-speaking nations. The French and Spanish preferred wine or brandy. The English sailors called the mixture grog, short for the Grogram code worn by British Admiral Edward Vernon. Noon was the serving time for grog in the British Navy, a tradition which held sway until October 31st, 1970, a date remembered with infamy among the sailors in Her Majesty's fleet. The United States Navy imposed mandatory teetotaling upon its sailors at sea on July 1st, 1914, though for several years the liquor ration had been steadily reduced and restricted. Flag dipping. To dip a flag that is being carried means to lower it by turning it forward from an upright position to 45 degrees or horizontal. This is done as a sign of respect or deference. At sea, It is done by lowering to half-mast and returning to full-mast position. To dip the flag on a merchant vessel passing a naval vessel involves lowering the stern flag, the country flag, to the half-mast position and back to the truck as the vessels pass a beam of each other. The half-mast position in this case being one flag width from the truck, as in the case of half-mast. Some jurisdictions have laws that discourage or prohibit the dipping of the national flag, including India, the Philippines, South Africa, and the United States. Cats on board. Ships are nearly perfect environments for rodents and other unwanted visitors, stowed away aboard to live in the myriad hidden spaces and crannies, often taking up residence during construction. Aboard naval vessels, with their constant inspections, they are less common than they once were. During the years before refrigeration and sealed containers for perishable foods, rats aboard ship were common, to the point that their eradication was a major part of ships' routine. Cats were popular members of ships' crews, both as pets for companionship and as anti-rodent patrols. Some became famous, occupying hallowed places in the memories of their shipmates, and in the annals of the Navy in which they served. A ship's cat known as Unsinkable Sam, for example, is honored with a pastel portrait in the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, England. Ships' cats are gone now, regulated out of existence by health restrictions and stuffed bureaucratic shirts in shore-bound offices.